I'm Mike Gombre with the Bridgeport Education Association, and we have the new teacher here in Bridgeport. He taught at one of the EAA schools in Detroit last year and had some interesting experiences. And was it what you expected?
Not at all. Not even close. They are selling a vision of what they want it to be, and the actual practice doesn't really match up with that.
Okay.
What happened typically was you would have students in language arts and math blocks for about 90 minutes, but that schedule took a long time to get up and running. We didn't start switching for language arts, I want to say about 3 or 4 weeks in. We didn't start switching for math until about 10 weeks into the school year. And what ended up happening was, they would run the schedule this way until somebody came into the building to visit us. And then we didn't run the schedule that way. We would have visitors come in regularly. Usually these were legislators, philanthropists, or administrators and executives from other school systems. This included as high up as the governor of Michigan himself was in our school 2 to 3 times during the school year.
So what you're saying is he did not see a normal school day. He saw a show.
Yes.
Or the legislators saw a show.
Yes, because what would happen is on days when we had visitors, people like me, I was a music teacher, would get pulled into a language arts or a math class to be a classroom assistant for the 90-minute block of ELA or math. That was actually a selling point of our upper-level administration. They would tell the visitors that that was done regularly. It was not. It only happened when visitors were there. And that might, that's one thing, but unfortunately, we blocked our math and language arts around when the visitors were coming. So math and ELA met at certain times each day, depending on the grade level. But I know, for instance, it might be 10 to 11:30 for middle school. On the day we had visitors, if the visitors were coming, say, at noon, the whole school would be in the ELA or math block from 11:30 to 1. We would move the time around from whenever it normally happened to whenever the visitors were coming. That included moving lunch for students. We, on occasion, with these setups, had middle schoolers eating as late as, I want to say, 1:05, and I can recall of days where elementary school students who had just finished breakfast at 8:45 were going in for lunch at 10:05.
Did the visitors ever see students changing classes?
No. That was part of why it was done. They didn't see class transitions. Okay. Now, I do think there were some changes in behavior, but we also expelled a lot of students. My school had about 550 students at the start of the year. I think it was down to about 400 by the end of the year.
What about this year? Did most of the staff from last year stay?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Could you describe the kind of support that you got as a new teacher?
Nearly non-existent, because there were so many of us that were new teachers. My mentor that I was assigned officially was the art teacher who was in her 2nd year of teaching. She didn't have, much different experience than I had had.
Did you feel like the administration supported you wholeheartedly in terms of discipline?
I think there were a lot of times when they liked to let people try and figure it out themselves. I didn't have this happen to me personally, but I had a colleague who was a 2nd grade teacher at TFA who I heard talk that the office at one point kind of just started ignoring it when she called down because of situations. I got the sense that there were certain things they just didn't want us to bother them with.
Do you see anybody that was in that system, in that school that you were in, that would look at it and say, this is a career, this is what I want to do, and I'll do this for 20 years or 30 years?
In education, yes. In that setting, no. And she found that there were maybe a handful of people out of 25 plus teachers that had any intention of even being there for 5 years. People were not going to stay in that system long term. And most of the people that I worked with didn't find the system to be sustainable, and they figured that they were going to be there for a year or 2 or maybe 3 and then head on to something else. I can count on one hand, maybe on one finger, the number of people that I think might actually say, yeah, okay, I'm going to stay here the rest of my career.
But you started at the beginning of the school year last year.
Yes.
And you made it through to the end.
I did.
Okay.
But, you know, you had people leaving for a lot of reasons. You had some that were working hard that just got pushed out at the end of the year. I had one coworker who was fired and found out via his mortgage company that he had been fired.
Wow.
I wish I were making that up. Unfortunately, I am not. Yeah, I mean, there's like no downtime. When you're looking at a 2-week summer and you're regularly, in my case, because of my commute, regularly out of the house for 12 hours a day. Not to mention we occasionally had like Saturday events that we were not compensated for but expected to be at. That happened 2 or 3 times during the course of the school year, I believe. There just wasn't enough time to recharge. I mean, the job was difficult. The students weren't easy to work with. It required a lot of effort and was very stressful. And there just wasn't enough time to recover. If I'm being completely honest, I'm at this point in the school year feeling worn out, and I'm pinning a lot of that simply on the fact that I had 2 weeks to recover from the last school year.
Right. Well, that makes me wonder, you've almost completed a year here
Yeah.
in Bridgeport. We have 35 days left.
Yes.
How would, and the staff here in Bridgeport, we've, I don't know, hired 15 new teachers this year, maybe. So we do have some younger teachers, but I've been here 19 years. We have one teacher who's been here 42 years. Mm-hmm. And we have a good set of new teachers. We have a good set of teachers who've been here maybe 10, 15 years. And we've got some older teachers. We've got a good variety.
Yes.
How would you compare your experience last year with your experience this year?
Well, to touch on the age thing real quick before I get into that, at 28, I'm one of the younger teachers here. Mm-hmm. Last year, at the age of 27, I was one of the older teachers in the building. I kind of look at this as my actual first year as a teacher. Last year was my first year as something. I don't know what, but I didn't actually feel like a teacher often enough. I guess that's the biggest thing I can say is I feel like a teacher this year. I feel like a young and experienced teacher that has a lot of stuff to work on still. And I know I'll be spending time this summer doing that, but I do feel like a teacher. I definitely feel like there's a lot more resources and opportunities in place for the students that I see around here. And of course, you know, more is always good for that too, but I do see a lot more of that. The students we had previously, there weren't enough options for them.
Do you see, could you stay in Bridgeport, do you think, for a while?
I could see that, absolutely, yes. If you asked my wife, she would insist that it is far better. And I think she'd be the better judge of that because she's the one that's had to see the stress level. I will say that I know last year, for a large portion of the school year, I was wanting to quit that school and, you know, considering whether that would mean the end of my career and considering that as an option despite that possibility. I do know that that is not in the mindset at all now.
Okay.
I think there are some things that when you hear about what they're doing, you need to be really cautious. First of all, when they talk about their numbers, having student success, student progress. I personally did not observe, this is called the performance series test that's being used. I personally did not observe any of the testing conditions. But every teacher I've talked to says that they don't really buy the results they were seeing from the testing. There were some very odd outliers. For instance, a student classified under an IEP reading at a 2nd grade level, he was in 3rd grade, who in a 6-week testing span shot up from 2nd grade level to 9th grade. A very strange outlier. There was also retesting occurring. So classes were given an opportunity to retake a test if it hadn't gone well. I do know that every teacher I talked to did not trust the results. Okay, let me rephrase that. Every teacher that had some experience, prior experience in education, did not trust the results. Because the student teachers that were younger and hadn't done it before, particularly those that were in TFA, were being told, hey, this is, your class is making a year's progress, this is going well, this is how it goes. And I had coworkers that were looking at it going, they haven't made a year's worth of progress. That's not a good measure of a year's worth of progress. So those things are not really honest. People should also know that the school itself wasn't as cohesive as it could have or should have been. The teaching staff was incredibly cohesive. We all bonded together quite well, particularly because a lot of us were young and because we were going through a lot of the same day-to-day stresses. But we had cafeteria workers from a different company. We had security guards from a different company. We had IT from a different company. These are all 3 different companies. We had a different company still for janitorial. We had another company, I believe, take care of busing. And student health was a different company as well. Special education services were a different private company. So our supervisor for special education services was not an employee, I believe, was not a direct employee of the system. That may not be stated correctly.
So basically everything was contracted out.
Yes.
Do you feel like this was an experiment in seeing how this would work, to contract everything out and bring all the pieces together? I
think so, but they're doing this experimentally and then throwing it out there saying it's immediately successful.
How do you feel about the idea of the Educational Achievement Authority expanding to cover more schools because of its initial success, or at least claimed success?
Well, that's the thing. I don't think the claimed success stacks up to what is being claimed.
Did the kids take to that longer day?
No. Not at all today.
How much freedom did teachers have to innovate?
Not as much as they'd like you to believe, because there is a certain... This system is designed, the people in charge have a specific vision for how they want the system to look, and they haven't really articulated that well, even to their teachers, because I don't think a lot of the teachers really understand how to go about doing what the people in charge would like. And we are expected to do things a certain way. A lot of the, if any innovation happened, a lot of it was just out of desperation. We didn't have books. A lot of those had been literally thrown away because of the computerized systems we were going to be using. And so there was a lot of stuff that kind of happened out of desperation, and there may have been some things there that were helpful. But, I mean, I had coworkers that tried to work with the people in charge and say, hey, here's how we can make this better. And they pretty much got shot down. They had a couple people at my school who I'm good friends with, but benefited greatly from the fact that as first-year TFA teachers, they were coming in and doing things exactly to the letter of what was expected of them by the administration, and then rewarded greatly for it, and were asked to lead a number of workshops, that kind of thing. So I don't really think they are looking for people to innovate. The way the curriculum works is referred to as student-centered learning. Students are generally working with computers and trying to go at their own pace. The concept of the system is that the students would go to the computer, find out what they needed to be working on, and would go to a part of the room where those materials were available and start working on that so that the students could move at their own pace.
Independently?
Independently, yes.
All the students?
Yes.
In all the core subjects?
In all the core subjects, and in fact the design is for all of the subjects, but they don't have curricular support there for anything except the core subjects. Even that wasn't there for part of the year last year, and I'm not completely certain it's all there now. They didn't have a curriculum in place when they started this. I mean, they said they did, they didn't have a curriculum in place.
Okay.
So pretty much what would happen then is you would go to these. They'd go to the computer and they would find out what they're supposed to be working on. Some of this is on the computer, some of it's stuff in the classroom. The computer, I think, is supposed to function as just the module that helps lead them along to where they need to be. What it ended up happening a lot is students would just be on the computer constantly.
So the books were thrown away?
Books literally in the dumpster. Many of the books, I was lucky they saved the music books for some reason. I did have access to those. That did help guide how I went through my curriculum. So I was able to make that work.
But just as another choice in the classroom for finding out information?
They literally threw them away. They said, we're not going to need them. We're going to have all this stuff on the computer, and they threw them away. Or sold them off in some cases.
Right. Okay. That stuns me, but...
Yes. Yes. I think as well it should. We were implicitly, at least by my administration, I'm sorry, not implicitly, explicitly discouraged from doing direct instruction. I had colleagues that received poor evaluations because of direct instruction. The students really did not take well to all the schedule changes, and we had it happen constantly. The visits I mentioned earlier, about 30 times during the school year. We had our day completely thrown around and rearranged around visitors and put on a show about 30 times.
Wow.
In my building. Now, that's because we were one of the model schools. We were one of the schools that was doing it the right way, or the way that they wanted to see. So they...
But what they saw wasn't what happened every day.
No, it wasn't at all. They didn't see class transitions. They saw extra people in the classroom that weren't typically there. They saw classes where students were not allowed to leave for things like the restroom. I mean, when you had visitors, we were explicitly told you are not allowed to send them out to the restroom without an adult. And if you didn't have an adult in the room, your students could not go anywhere for any reason. We had people that were written up or threatened to be written up for that, and we ended up with a couple students that went to the bathroom on themselves, and I'm talking as old as 5th grade in one case, because the teacher was afraid of being written up because we had been given explicit directions not to send them out during visits.
But you're saying the programs, the computerized program wasn't filled out. Was what was there high quality? Was it interesting to the kids? Was it engaging? Did it capture their imagination?
I don't believe so. One of my coworkers was a kindergarten teacher, and I guess her students took to, this system was called Buzz, this online platform, and I guess her students took to looking at Buzz as a punishment. It was not uncommon, though, for the students in grades 4 through 8 for their entire, or large portions of their reading and math blocks to be on the computer.
Wow.
It was not uncommon.
But if it's student-centered and it's student-directed and it's student-motivated, what was the job of the teacher?
Well, they looked at the teacher as a facilitator.
If the kids get stuck, the teacher helps them get unstuck?
Yeah, that sounds correct. They also viewed the teacher as someone who was, honestly, I think they viewed the teachers as curriculum designers, quite frankly, because I think it was their goal for the teachers to put in different modules that, when the students were learning something, they could pick different options for how to learn it. Like there might be a video, and there might be a website, and there might be, if there were access to manipulative, so they might have different options as to how they learned it. And they looked for the teachers to try and add to that. The way they had it set up, they were hoping that the teachers would add to the platform and people could share ideas. Which, again, in theory sounds fantastic, and I think it could have worked well if teachers had sufficient time and acumen to do that. I think last year, and I'm guessing probably this year, it was just kind of a scramble. But they were basically, teachers were adding material, doing that kind of thing, and the goal of the teacher was to know basically where every student was at all times in those core subjects. They wanted the teacher to basically, I say this carefully, be sort of a bit of a data monger. Okay. They wanted the teacher to be able to know that at all points And of course, the web system we were using was supposed to have tools that would help with that, and they weren't functional or functioning well. You know, we had some proposals that had like a teacher in a room with like 40 students at computers for like middle school, and I don't know if they actually did that this year, but where the students would be, it would be like a lab supervisor, almost. And I don't know if that happened or not, but we had some proposals knocked around at the end of the year last year with middle school that looked kind of like that. Honestly, having taught there for a year, I'm not really sure what they expect the role for their teachers to be, quite frankly. There were a number where they tried to fire, and they actually it concluded that they had not fired them in a legal manner. We had a lot of turnover and a lot of changes. We changed our schedule, how our daily schedule went about 5 times during the year last year. We had an administrator change midway through the year because they promoted our assistant principal to a principal at another building because they had fired that principal in March, I think.
Did you feel mentored by the principal or the assistant
I felt
principal?
bullied by the principal. I didn't feel mentored.
Wow, could you explain that?
Well, anytime we needed to know anything, we got a strongly worded email. Often was pointed out that a write-up could be put in our file if we didn't follow the directive. For instance, the aforementioned things where we had visitors and we were not to let the kids out of the room. It was made clear that we could be written up for that if we did not follow for that. Anytime something didn't go right, it was like, teachers need to be doing this, exclamation point, yada, yada, yada. We had meetings where the tone was not fantastic. One stands out in particular, was pointed out that the principal had received a stack of resumes, or several resumes, during the course of that week, basically saying, you're replaceable. So I didn't feel mentored. And we again, felt bullied. I was pulled out of a class one time to get chewed out for lunch duty performance. There were about 4 or 5 of us. We were chewed out for lunch duty performance because they were about to get audited by the state, and they wanted to make sure they didn't send too many kids up in the line. So we got yelled at for about 10, 15 minutes when we were supposed to be teaching.
And what did you do that was wrong?
You're supposed to send them up like 10 at a time, which we hadn't been doing at any point the whole year. But apparently we had too many kids in line at the same time. But they didn't tell the teachers that we weren't at our class. I had a group of kindergartners waiting with their teacher outside my room because nobody told them that, hey, music's going to be delayed 15 minutes.
I see.
That is, to be fair, the most egregious example. I don't want to make it sound like it was like that every day.
Sure.
But there were moments like that were just completely hard to believe. I wouldn't have believed it had I not experienced it, quite frankly. I kept saying with some coworkers that I should have written a book, and I wish I had. Because I'm sure I've forgotten some of the stories. There was something crazy, or off, or unusual, or just wrong, almost daily. The principals, I think, expected you to come to them, but people were scared to do that because they tried to fire somebody within the first 3 weeks of school. So everybody's pretty much like, okay then, I can't disagree, or they're going to boot me out of here. But they wanted you to come talk to them if you needed something. That didn't work too well. There were just too many situations where we were not given a lot of respect. It's what it amounted to. And the more experienced the teachers were, the more they bristled against the way things were being handled by the administration. The people that they were trying to push out were not first-year teachers. They were trying to push out experienced teachers that disagreed with them. I was given an evaluation last year. My total score was at 2.9, which means under Michigan's setting I'm considered minimally effective. Which made it kind of funny that I was invited to be part of a professional development team for this school year that would be training other teachers in how the system worked. My evaluations varied by on a 1 to 4 scale, by a full point from one administrator to the other. Mm-hmm. I don't think the parents were behind the system. And that's another thing that's interesting. The attendance was terrible.
I was going to ask about the parents next.
Summertime, our attendance, once Detroit Public closed for the year, our attendance was between 50 to 75% most days. Any day DPS was closed, it was a given that we weren't going to have more than probably about 75% of the kids. We hit as low as 50% a few times on days that we were open but DPS was closed. The system had like a 24% drop in enrollment, I want to say. I think that was the number quoted between the beginning of last year and the beginning of this year. So I don't think they have the parent support on that. But I think they wanted to do things like field trips, which we never did because we didn't have a budget for it. We were on a pay freeze, copy freeze, hiring freeze, any freeze you pretty much wanted to put out there. We used colored paper from March up through August. We did not get a single sheet of white, not a single sheet. We did not get any discernible amount of white paper from March on. And we were on a copy ration anyway, so there was no money for anything. And some of that may have been because they misunderstood how they were getting Title I funds, so they came up about $18 million short that they thought they were going to get that went to DPS instead last year.
Anything else that you'd like to share? I know we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. That's the big thing, is that to me, there's just not enough stuff that they have actually done that should allow for an expansion of what is in place. I couldn't trust anything the organization was saying, and I worked in the organization. And I don't know how anybody else out there can trust what they're saying if their own employees can't trust them.
You wouldn't send your child to one of those schools?
No. And I wouldn't. No. And I just can't believe anything that is coming out of the organization. I couldn't even believe the data we were putting out of our own school about improvement. It didn't compute.
That must be hard for you, though, because I know being a teacher, you get connected to the kids. You feel like you get connected with your colleagues. You feel like you're involved in trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And talking about it in a negative way feels like a betrayal in a way.
Well, it is, because I think about like the people that are still there, and I know it would have to be hurtful to them to be hearing things like that coming out about the system, but it's not the teachers. I mean, there may be some instances, there are reports about abuses happening, particularly in special education situations. I didn't did not witness anything personally. I can't speak to that. But to me, it wasn't the teachers, and it wasn't the students. I mean, they were difficult. They made things very stressful at times because they had a lot of problems to deal with. But it does feel bad, but it's not the fault of the teachers and the students, and I guess that's what I come back to when I think about it.
Teachers that are there recognize what you're saying is the truth.
I hope so, and I believe so. I really don't feel like they view this all that much differently than I do. I think some of them understand that they're staying there this year because they had a TFA commitment or because they need a little bit more time before they go somewhere else, or they're really committed to the students. But I think most of them would recognize that the system is flawed. I don't think you'd find a lot of apologists if you were to talk to them individually in private. There is just not a consistency to it. It's trying to change constantly, but I don't know if it really knows where it's going or where it should be going. The phrase was used by upper-level administration, and I quote, "We are building the plane as we fly it," in professional development meetings. Which, I don't know, I can accept that statement at face value, except for the fact of pushing for expansion and claiming success. I worked there for a year. I have no clue if it's actually doing any good, is my ultimate takeaway. I have no clue. I don't think there's a nebulous vision with an inconsistent plan of how to achieve it. And I don't think the people in charge have any sense of really of how to get there. I think some of them think they have a sense of how to get there, and I just didn't see enough evidence that backed that up personally.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's pretty good.
You know, hope it was informative.
Very, very. I mean, firsthand information is always better than kind of the political back and forth.
Yes.
I mean, I did hear that the test scores actually went down in some areas compared to the year before.
I've seen that as well.
Even though it was claimed that the model was being successful.
They're claiming success based on internal data. They are not using external data to claim that. They are saying they're successful because the internal data is showing that the scores are going up.
Okay. Okay, I didn't know that.
They are referencing the performance series testing internal data to claim success. That was what they claimed when they say we have X number of students that are making a year to a year and a half worth of progress. That's what they're coming up with, is the performance series is saying this student has made a year of progress or has made a year and a half of progress. That's where that is coming from.
Is that based on the computerized data?
That's based on the computerized test, the adaptive testing. And
Okay. You don't happen to know what program they're using or what system?
it's called performance series.
Performance series. Okay.
I don't know much about it, but I didn't see anything that I viewed as trustworthy.
All right. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Bet.